Thank you, Maria. Right, good evening and welcome to the Council's Scrutiny Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Tom Mahoney, sorry, I forgot my name there, and I'm chairman of this meeting. This meeting is also being web streamed to the public and is being attended by the members through Microsoft Teams. Before we begin working through the agenda, I will go through some rules on procedure. The web streaming of this meeting is being monitored by IT services. If at any point there are streaming issues, then I will be informed and the meeting will be adjourned until such time as the technological issues can be resolved. If during the course of the meeting any member of the committee is having connection issues, then there will be a short adjournment for up to 5 minutes to determine whether the connection issues can be resolved. If following the adjournment the connection issues cannot be resolved, then providing the meeting remains quorate, it will continue and it will be deemed that the member with the connection issues has left the meeting and will no longer be able to participate. For all attendees, please could you switch off your microphones and cameras now? For members of the committee, your microphones and cameras should be switched off unless you are speaking. If you wish to speak during the meeting, please use the raised hand function and wait for me to ask you to speak. The voting during virtual meetings will use the raised hands function and I will call the Democratic Services Officer to confirm the vote. Are there any questions before we move into the formal agenda? Nope. I will now ask Democratic Services Officer Lynn to confirm the attendees at this meeting. This will be for committee members only and substitutes. When your name is called, please confirm your attendance and then we will move on to the formal agenda. So Lynn, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll mark you as present, Councillor Mahoney.
Thank you.
Rest of the committee, Councillor Mrs. Abarrow.
Present.
Councillor Cade.
Present.
Councillor Eccleston.
Yeah, present.
Councillor Gilliath.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. New.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. O'Rourke.
Present.
Councillor Picker.
Present.
Councillor Roodhouse.
Yes, I'm present.
That's the committee all present, Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Right, so move on to the main agenda. So start off with item 1, minutes. To approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of December. Are you okay for me to sign? Well, I'll put it this way. Raise your hands if you have any objections to the minutes. Right, I'll sign those off. Apologies. I'll take it because we're all here. There's no apologies. Lynn?
No, Chair, no apologies.
Right. Declarations of interest. To receive declarations of A, non-pecuniary interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors. No indication. Pecuniary interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for councillors. And notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Acts of 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax. Again, no indication. Right, we're going on to item 4. This will be a quick one. For reasons I don't want to go into at the moment, the officer from the Revenues Department is not joining us tonight. So I've taken it upon myself with your agreement that we will set up the working party for managing arrears. You've all seen the one-page strategy. Okay, Councillor Roodhouse, Jerry?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm happy to second your proposal that we move the one-page strategy and establish the task and finish group.
Right. Are we all in agreement with that? Please raise your hands, please, if you're in agreement with that. And thank you for that, Jerry. Looks like it's unanimous. So what I'll ask for is the manager from the revenues to report directly to the Task and Finish group when it's set up. I believe there's already invites gone out. So Lynn, I think, has got about 6 names. What I would hope, because I'm not party to all the names, if there's any from this committee that have put the names forward, I'm hoping that you'll also put yourself forward to chair that group. But obviously that'll be up to the group to decide. Okay. So I haven't dealt with item 4. We're now going to move on to item 5, which is a verbal report from the Deputy Executive Director, Dan Green. So Dan, if you'd like to take on, please.
Thanks, Chair. And the brief I've taken for this agenda item is to provide an overview of the waste and resources strategy and to possibly highlight some areas which the committee might like to look at in the future. So with your permission, Chair, would you be okay with me just sharing my screen so I can take you through a few slides?
Yeah, can I just ask one question before you start, just for clarity? Yeah. The committee's under the impression this work is mainly being already undertaken by the Cabinet Working Party. Can you confirm that?
The Cabinet Working Party is looking at parts of the agenda, but I hope to give an overview of the whole agenda, and overview and scrutiny can look at any specific items arising from that.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Okay, so thanks, Chair. Can you see my screen there?
Yes, I can.
Good. So the Waste and Resources Strategy was introduced by DEFRA back in 2019 as part of the government's 25-year environment plan. As members will be aware, it was a significant piece of work, and it was a fundamental relook at waste management systems within England, and in particular looking at the circular economy and the economic drivers behind waste. So how could it become financially viable to increase waste minimisation and reuse of resources? Some of the highlights of the strategy were extended producer responsibility, which looked at manufacturers of waste being responsible for the disposal of waste. A deposit return scheme, which meant that consumers of waste, so plastic packaging and the like, could have a deposit attached at the point of purchase to that waste, which they'd then be able to reclaim in the future. Consistent collections, so particularly for ourselves as a waste collection authority, consistency in the materials and the frequency and the costs of those collections. And within the strategy, there was a commitment that additional financial burdens would be met. So just briefly, in terms of the timeline, the first publication of the Resources and Waste Strategy paper was back in January 2019. Subsequently, the government consulted on the strategy, 3 separate consultations, and as part of the Warwickshire Waste Partnership, Rugby Borough Council submitted a response in April 2019. Back in July 2019, the government provided responses to the consultations and provided detail of a second consultation which would take place, looking at some of the finer details of the strategy with a view for implementation in 2023. There are a number of chapters within the Resources and Waste Strategy. I won't go into them all here, but perhaps the most significant for us as a council was Chapter 3, which dealt with resource recovery and waste management. Excuse me. And within that chapter, the strategy looked at how to improve recycling rates by ensuring a consistent set of dry recyclable material is collected from all households and businesses. There were proposals around weekly separate food waste collections, which of course is something which we don't currently do in Rugby. And again, that would be subject to further consultation. There was moves to improve urban recycling rates by working with businesses and indeed ourselves as the local authorities. There were moves to improve working arrangements between upper and lower tier authorities as the collection and disposal authorities. And there was efforts to drive greater efficiency from energy from waste plants. So, for example, to look at how we can best use the materials that can't be recycled. Some of the key themes within the consultations. So proposal 1 was that all authorities should be required to collect a consistent set of core dry recyclable materials at the curbside. And proposal 2 clarified that that should be glass bottles and containers, paper and card, plastic bottles, plastic pots, tubs and trays, and steel and aluminium tins and cans. So similar to the sets of materials which we currently collect from the curbside. Proposal 4, as referenced just before, was that all English local authorities should provide a curbside food waste collection. Again, something we don't currently do here in Rugby. And proposal 7 was regarding garden waste, and it was to consider whether households generating garden waste should be entitled to free fortnightly collections. So a number of local authorities, including ourselves, provided responses, varying responses, and in July of 2019, the government published their response to those consultations. So first of all, in terms of consistent collections, I think it was universally agreed that this was a good idea and that government would seek to amend legislation to require all English local authorities to collect that same set of materials, paper and card, plastic bottles, plastic tubs, trays, and steel and aluminium tins and cans. I guess that set of materials doesn't include things like Tetra Pak, which we already collect here in Rugby. However, government have committed that that would be a set of materials that would be periodically reviewed and potentially added to. Secondly, in terms of food waste, again, there was a mixed response to this, but government confirmed that they would legislate to ensure that every local authority provides householders with a free, separate food waste collection. And this is one which I think for ourselves in Rugby, there will need to be some significant consideration of. The government's preference was that that should be a separate weekly food waste collection, so not mixed with garden waste. As you'll be aware, our residents can currently put food waste in with their garden waste, but due to the treatment of the two different waste streams, government were of the view that ideally they would not be combined. It was clear from the responses of that consultation that there is significant further consideration needed with respect to local circumstances, and that government would work with local authorities to consider how to deliver this, including the financial requirements of doing so. And then finally, in terms of the garden waste consultation, government faced significant opposition, I think, to the premise of providing a free garden waste collection for all residents throughout the country. However, retained the view that this would be the most effective way of ensuring the collection and use of garden waste. There was note that there was a significant response of opposition, particularly from local authorities, and we're aware that in excess of 2/3 of local authorities now charge for garden waste collection. So that potentially gives an indication as to why there was such an opposition to that. And there was a commitment from government that they would give further consideration to the costs and benefits of this measure before making a final decision. So this is one that we think will be a key part of any forthcoming consultation. Of note, one of the consultations that wasn't directly related to local authorities but does have an implication is the deposit return scheme. And as a result of that process, the government has pledged to implement a deposit return scheme for drinks containers from 2023. Local authorities, including ourselves, have highlighted some concerns with this in terms of the impact of the materials which we collect at the curbside. So if essentially the high value materials are taken out of that waste stream, i.e. that they have a financial resource attributed to them and consumers return them themselves, then actually what we're left with is the low value recyclable materials to collect, and the value that we derive from recycling those would be significantly less. So there would be a financial impact for us as collection authorities of doing this. The final point that I've noted there is that the government have not yet confirmed which model of deposit return scheme will be implemented here. So there's two options there: an all-in model, which sees a far broader range of materials collected and actually far larger, so up to 3 litres in size, or what they term on-the-go materials. So these are your drinks cartridges that people pick up as part of a meal deal, for example. So things that people generally collect when they're out and about. So in terms of considerations for us as a council, I thought there was 3 areas that warranted some further exploration, and these aren't areas which are currently covered by the Cabinet Working Group, which the Chair referred to before. So firstly, weekly food collections. What would be the best way of implementing this locally? We know there are lots of different models of doing this and different costs and different benefits associated with each. So what would be the most beneficial locally? Secondly, the risk of the lower value dry mix recycling as a result of deposit return scheme. How do we, first of all, understand that risk? How do we mitigate that risk? And potentially, how could we benefit from the deposit return scheme? And then thirdly, community leadership. So key to the whole waste strategy was the view that we as a society need to help customers make considered and better environmental decisions. And linking in with our climate change agenda, how can we as a council support our residents in the borough to do that? So that's a very brief overview for your Chair. I'm happy to pick up any questions now, but I'm equally happy to pick up on any of those themes and do a more detailed presentation for you at some point in the future.
Right, has anybody got any questions first? Noreen as first one up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dan, for that presentation. I just feel that the government is expecting local councils to deal with an end pipe solution of dealing with waste that's already been generated. Sorry, I'm hiding from you. Why is more pressure not being put on the government so that the producers are being responsible for the amount of waste they generate in their packaging? They're not taking it seriously. I don't feel that the producers are reducing the amount of waste that they generate in the first place. And we are having to deal with the end solution of recycling and disposal. So I think we need to look at if we can put some more pressure on government about that side of it. That's my rant over. And the weekly food collections, how much would that likely to be cost? Have we got costings for that, please?
Well, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to get all the questions, then ask Dan to answer them in turn, if that's all right with you, Dan.
That's absolutely fine. Thanks, Chair.
Right. This new setup, I can't see who came in at which order, so I think the next one, Councillor Ian Picker.
I believe Councillor Cade was before me, but I'm happy to go now if that's all right with Chris.
No problem.
Okay. So sort of 2 comments. The first is that last year, or possibly year before now, actually, we were looking at a materials recycling facility alongside other local authorities in the area. Have we done any kind of assessment on whether that project's still viable in the light of these announcements? And secondly, just to pick up on a comment that Councillor New made regarding the plastic packaging side of things, that's actually being debated in Parliament tomorrow as part of the Environment Bill, so watch this space.
Thank you for that.
Chair, you're on mute.
It's all from me, Chair.
Sorry, Chris, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification, really. I was trying to read the slides while Dan was talking, and Dan used the term free when it came to food waste collection, and I didn't see that on any of the slides.
Right, okay, we're going to get the answers afterwards, Chris.
Thank you.
Councillor Norring, can you, your hand is still up. Are you still intending to speak
Sorry,
again?
Chair.
That's all right. Councillor Jerry Roodhouse, please.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, a couple of things really. Like Noreen, it'd be interested to know, I suppose, around the finances of this, but that'll be a bit further down the track. Also, looking at best practice and benchmarking going ahead, would it be worthwhile also having some information from RAP, the waste people, to see what else and what ideas that they've got? Because the biggest impact that we potentially will have is around community leadership and the education programs that can be brought in. And if you look historically at where the Borough Council did do a drive on recycling, if you like, everything, the figures all went in the right direction. Once we stopped the education, all the figures started dropping away again.
Thank you, Jerry. Councillor Julie Barrow.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dan. Just following on from what Jerry's just said about community engagement, I thought I'd heard a long time ago, and I've been waiting for it a long time, for all authorities to be uniform across the UK, because out there in the community, people do not know which is recyclable and which isn't. Has Dan got any news on that, please?
All right, thank you. Councillor Maggie O'Rourke.
Thank you, Tom. I just wondered whether Dan had considered the new Green Routes funding in terms of the community leadership stuff and the messages that we want to get out there, because I know the paper's coming forward from counties shortly, and I believe there's a lot of money attached to that, and it's particularly associated with community initiatives about recycling. So I would think that might be something that we could look at a scrutiny. But I'm also the waste. I mean, the food wasting for me is the one that, it is the real challenge, I think. One, obviously, to stop the food waste in the first place, but where there is food waste, what, are there models that we could be looking at in terms of business opportunities? I don't know enough about it. So the two things for me around the food waste, and also looking at the green shoots money, and I believe there's over £1 million in the pot for Warwickshire. So please, whoever takes all these initiatives on in terms of the community leadership and making sure we've got communities engaged and working on initiatives, can we work that into our plan, please?
Right, thank you. Tony.
Yes, Chair. Thanks for letting us have put my 2 penny within. Yeah, the deposit return scheme. Because this is nothing new, of course, and certainly when I was a youngster, there was lots of evidence of manufacturers, having one good example was our whites, the pop bottle, like tuppence or threepence on return. Can you remember that far back?
Yeah.
But you tend to find that quite a lot of wealthy folks wouldn't bother about the deposit. They'd just put it in the dustbin. So I think there would be quite a fair old percentage of folks that won't bother, collecting their deposit back on some of these returned items, and therefore there could be something in it for the council to recoup some of the money. But the one thing I have found over the years, and because I lead a very, very sad life in my day job, I look inside lots of people's dustbins, and I still find a lot of recyclable material in the black bin. So there's a lot of mileage in re-educating the public of which stuff goes in which bin.
Right, thank you, Tony. Right, nobody else. Julie, did you want to come back in? Your hand is still up.
No, sorry, Chair. I'll lower it.
It's all right. We're all new at this, especially me. Dan, if you can respond, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and address each of those points in turn, but please do tell me if I've missed one. First of all, Councillor New, you asked about producers, and I'm really pleased to say that that was one of the key parts of the government's waste and resources strategy, was that producers would pay. So those that caused the waste at the point of manufacture would eventually pay for it. There is some technical papers actually that explain how that happens, and I have to say I've had to have them explained to me by an economist, but they do eventually make sense, and I'd be glad to share those with the committee. But just to be clear, that actually a big driver of this strategy was kind of the circular economy around waste, and actually providing that financial incentive to the producers to reduce their waste and then to deal with it in a responsible way when it arises. So that is in there. Secondly, in terms of how much would a food waste collection cost, and the answer is we don't have a figure for that, but it kind of depends on the model that you use to do it. So you could have a separate fleet of vehicles that drive around the borough purely collecting food waste. You'd have to question the environmental credentials of doing so when you think of the carbon footprint for a relatively low quantity of waste. Or alternatively, there are other authorities, such as Daventry is probably the closest by, where they've invested in split pod vehicles. So they have a garden waste collection lorry which has a pod at the front which just holds the small amount of food waste, so the crews can actually pick that up whilst they're out doing the garden waste collections. For that example, there's a high capital cost because you have to buy the fleet that will meet that requirement, but actually the ongoing revenue cost of it is slightly lower because the crews are out and about anyway. Councillor Picker asked about the MRF project and is this still viable? And this has been a matter that we've discussed at great depth with colleagues across the sub-region. It's actually been something that I've asked questions on myself. And that MRF project has had a specific piece of work done on it to look at the consideration of the deposit return scheme and the change in both the volume and the makeup of the materials that will be passing through that facility as a result of the deposit return scheme. I'm pleased to say it is still viable on its own, but this is another area where you start thinking about the opportunities. So those materials that are taken into the deposit return scheme still have to be processed and sold on somewhere. So is there an opportunity for a MRF to take on that responsibility and actually drive some commercial business through doing so? Councillor Cade picked up on my use of the word free in relation to food collections. It would of course be free, and that may have been an error on my part because I was probably thinking of the free garden waste collections, which were another part of the strategy. But just to be absolutely clear, any food waste collections would be free for residents. Councillor Roodhouse asked about the finances and best practice, and I agree they're both areas that we need to look into more deeply over the coming months and years. And in particular, the work in relation to community leadership. I would be very keen to engage with an organisation such as RAP, and I do take your point on board and the point that was made later in the discussion about how we as an authority can encourage people to recycle better, and actually the benefits, first of all for us as a collection authority, but also for the environment and for residents in general of doing so. So I'd be very keen to engage with an organisation such as RAP on doing that. Councillor Barrow, consistency across authorities was a big part of this strategy, and it will continue to be so. First of all, consistency of collections. The intention is that set of materials that can be collected by all authorities will be uniform. So there won't be any, in this area we collect Tetra Paks, in this area we don't. It will be a consistent set of recyclable materials across all areas of the country. Part of the initial discussion, and I attended a briefing on this down at DEFRA, was whether they actually have universal bin colours. So each different authority would have the same coloured bin for refuse collections, the same for mixed recycling, and the same for garden waste. That isn't something that I think is being taken forward at the moment, but it's one of the areas where I think government will reserve the right to revisit that at some point in the future. Councillor O'Rourke asked about the Green Roots Fund, and yes, we're very much aware from that. My understanding is it's only voluntary and community groups that can apply for it. The council can't directly, but particularly through Carver, we are working with local voluntary and community groups to make them aware of that fund and to ensure that groups within rugby have fair access to that and hopefully get some of their grant funds approved. I agree with you that food waste is the biggest challenge. It's an interesting point that you make about the take-up of food waste recycling, and again, just because it's an area that I've discussed recently, Daventry District Council did have a food waste collection. It was very poorly used, but at the same time as they move to dry mix recycling, they also moved to 3 weekly waste collections. So they moved to this 3-2-1 system whereby you have 3 weekly refuse collections, fortnightly recycling, and weekly food waste collections. In doing so, the bin capacity which people had became far more precious, if you like, and people within Daventry District seem to really protect the capacity that they had in their residual waste bins. And so at the same time as doing that, their food waste take up rose exponentially. It really did go through the roof, and it's a real success story, I guess, for them. So in implementing a food waste collection, yes, the take up is generally across the country quite low, and there's a relatively small proportion of people that do take up food waste collections. However, if that's paired with a reduction in the capacity that people are able to put in their refuse bins, then it does drive that behavioural change, and people do start to recycle food waste more. And then finally, Councillor Gillias, you're quite correct in that the deposit return scheme is nothing new. And I too remember chasing the Corona man around, Corona man, the pop bottle man around in my youth, getting my 10 pence back on my lemonade bottle. So it is something that's been done before. Deposit return schemes operate on the continent in places like Germany and Holland, I think, with a great deal of success already. So they can be a really positive thing, and they can, again, drive that behavioural change whereby people start to place a value on their waste and therefore dispose of it through a more appropriate route. We have discussed, certainly within the waste arena, we've discussed, is there a potential for it to drive some slightly adverse behaviour in the example that you gave of people putting recyclable material in their bins? Well, could this drive that behaviour whereby people are going round recycling collections on the day before they're due to be picked up by our refuse crews and taking out any materials of value? And they're all parts of the consideration that we will have to have in our minds as we move forward with this. So there's a lot of detail yet to be revealed on how the deposit return scheme will operate here, but I think when it does, it will take a fundamental rethink of the way that we collect dry recyclables. And again, I take your point that the volume of recyclable material that's in bins is still high. I think rugby performs pretty well in terms of that. We have a waste audit which is undertaken regularly, and rugby does very well in terms of the proportion of materials that are being recycled, but there is significant room for improvement there. And I hope I've answered all of your questions.
Right, well, I've got a couple of questions, Dan, and it's mainly from a management point of view, not me being a manager, but for managing the committee. First of all, what areas specifically do you envisage Scrutiny to be looking at, and when would you like a report to be finalised by? Because listening to what you've said and the number of areas you've covered, it's a big piece of work. It could take up to 12 months. So if you want us to look at it in depth, we're going to have to set this up by the next meeting.
Yeah, I think there are two areas, and I'll be guided by members of the committee as to which they think would be the most beneficial to look at. I think, first of all, there's the piece around community leadership in education, and I do take the point that's been made by a couple of members so far that actually we could do a lot more in terms of community leadership in education. And I think that links in nicely with the climate change agenda as well. And the second one is looking at the different models for food waste collection and actually formulating almost a preference as to which model we'd like to adopt here. So I think that there's two areas where Scrutiny could really add some value there. First of all, the community leadership in education, and secondly, the models for food waste collection. Both of those, well, the food waste collection, we're obviously looking at 2023 as being the likely implementation date. So I'd certainly want to see us working up a proposal in the next 12 months. But the education piece, I think we could probably do more rapidly. And I think it'd be quite a nice tie between the work of this Scrutiny committee and the work of the climate change group.
Yeah, I've got a feeling though, and Lynn may be able to correct me on this, but I think a couple of years ago when we first did recycling, we did have some work done on, what's the word, informing the residents on what items to be recycled and how to best recycle. Or is it that not relevant? Sorry, Jerry, come in, please. Yeah, before Dan, sorry.
Oh, that's right. Thanks. I think part of my view is
you're breaking up, Jerry. I don't know why, but I'm only catching every other word.
I mean, part of my view is that I think yes, let's pull on the history of what there is, but also if we could involve, if you like, RAP, who are doing this nationally and looking at best practice to try and develop something which fits the emerging agenda, which is going towards 2023. And I totally agree with Dan. Totally a separate piece of work alongside that then is the food waste, which of course would also be looking at the MRF and the bigger jobs. But the education side, I think, is slightly different because all that did really was look, if I remember rightly, was look at the digital side and the animation and the very good wheelie bins, which were put out as a clip. I think what we're talking about here is something bigger and broader. So how we're working in our communities, with schools, with everybody, in particular, you know, what other good practice is going on elsewhere.
Yeah, I get that. What I'm trying to get my head around, if you'll forgive me for a second, is whether we're going to have two task and finish groups. One looking at the community leadership side, and the other one looking at the food collection side, or having one that does two reports. Bearing in mind we've got capacity issues as well at the moment. Dan, if you might like to make a suggestion on that.
My view is that they're probably two separate pieces of work, and putting them both on one task group would probably overburden that task group, is my view.
Right, because that will have an impact on the timing of the longer one. So my suggestion would be we do the quickie first, i.e. the leadership one, and hopefully maintain the same membership of that task group, then to take on the second piece of work. Has anybody got any reasons why we can't do it that way? Dan, you're flashing.
Apologies.
That's all right. Are you all in agreement with that? I'm not getting a response.
That sounds good to me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, happy with that.
Right.
I mean, if the weekly food one, I mean, I suppose just to Dan, if it's two separate pieces of work, if you could also give an indication that, you know, next May or something would be a good time to start the food one.
For the next meeting, I'll work with Lynn and Dan, and we'll have a one-page strategy with the timings on it. So that that'll be for the leadership one. Like you said, it'll be done May, June at the latest, and that same membership, and we'll put that in the invites, will be maintained to carry on the second piece of work, which I would envisage reporting back about February of 2020. Councillor Pickett-Ian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just although I agree with the broad principle that it would make sense for there to be a decent amount of continuity between the two task and finish groups, if they are separate groups, there may be some councillors who have an interest in one element but not so much in the other element. So it doesn't necessarily make total sense for me to say it's going to be the exact same group of people carrying it through, but I'm happy to go with the broader committee on this one.
There's always a bit of flexibility in everything we do, and that's the new way of working. So I wouldn't be against people dropping out or people dropping in, but broadly to keep that continuity and the knowledge that will be gained from doing the first piece of work to carry it on into the second. So if we're all in agreement with that, I'll ask Lynn to arrange a meeting with myself and Tony and Dan to flash out an initial one-page strategy for the community leadership side. And on the back of that, we'll do some work, if we can, and probably present both one-page strategies at the next meeting. Are you all in agreement with that? If you can just raise your hands if you are, it's easier for me that way. Yep, okay, we're all in agreement. So that is okay with you, Lynn?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Dan?
Very happy with that, thanks, Chair.
Right, so if there's no other questions or anybody else want to say anything on this subject, we'll move on to the next one, which is training and development for members. Now, you've all had the paper, so I'm going to do this the easy way, and I'll take it you've all had time to read it, the report that AFTAB has sent out. So the way I'm going to deal with this one, does anybody have any questions for AFTAB on the training and development for members? If so, please raise your hands in the normal way. Councillor Roodhouse Jerry, and then Noreen.
Thanks. Yeah, it's just to AFTAB really, if we need to be clearer about what is compulsory training and what isn't. And I was speaking with Dan and Manny earlier on today, and actually we were discussing some particular issues around safeguarding and those particular elements, and whether they should be part of future training and involvement. We do equality, but we don't get involved in that particular side of being aware of that. So it's if you like, we need some clarity around that going forward, I think.
All right, Noreen, your hands dropped down. So AFTAB, do you want to come back and answer that straight away, please?
Yeah, happy to, Chair. In terms of the compulsory requirements around training, that's effectively dictated by the Constitution, but there is always the ability to amend that. So in terms of dealing with additional points such as safeguarding, as Councillor Roodhouse has raised, then given that there is going to be a constitutional review during the coming few months, then we can implement those additional points on training as well.
Right, has anybody else got any remarks or questions? Councillor Julie?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a small one. I see in the briefing notes that it was recommended that an annual training record was kept for each member. I would have thought that this would have been kept in any case. I wondered what the recommendation was, whether it was different in any way, whether it was expected to be published or kept by a different officer, because I would have thought already that Claire probably was ticking off who was doing what training.
AFTAB.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So at present we keep a record of the training undertaken by different members in terms of attendance. I think in terms of the briefing paper and the recommendations that I've set out, the training record will take a different perspective, and that would look at the wider principle in terms of training needs, skills audit and those areas which members perhaps need further development and support upon.
All right, is anybody else, any other questions? Councillor Chris Cade?
Yeah, I was just wondering how we would effectively cover the point that Donald Rumsfeld made so successfully about you don't know what you don't know till you realise that you didn't know it. And if we're trying to get a consistent approach to mandatory training, for example, then people need to be able to understand what it is they're being mandated to attend in order for them to buy into it.
Do you want to respond to that, Aftab?
Yeah, I can do. I think in terms of that, but for me, it's the briefing paper and the recommendations is to allow a dialogue to take place primarily through the training coordinators to look at development needs and the wider training program, which isn't taking place at the moment. So if that is undertaken in a more cohesive and structured way, then it will allow those training needs to be identified and that clarity for members as to what areas they need to focus upon.
Thank you.
There's nobody else, so
Yeah, it's me, Tom.
I can't see your hand. Oh, sorry, Maggie, you're in the corner there. Yeah, Maggie, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's very good. It's a good paper. And, you know, it is very separate, the sort of mandatory training from, you know, the sort of the skills gap that we might have. And if we're to sort of bring the best out in all of our councillors and develop leaders of the future, then we need to make sure that we have got those sort of organisational development plans in place to, you know, to sort of do that and to drive forward a culture, the sort of culture that we want. So skills, knowledge and behaviour come to mind. So I welcome it. I think it's really good. Thank you.
Right. So in conclusion then, as we as a committee, are we happy that the conclusions and recommendations set out in the briefing paper go forward as a recommendation from this committee? Please raise your hands if you're in agreement. Right, so we'll do that then. Thank you very much. Just got to get this back to the page. We're now on to the overview and scrutiny work programme for 2020-21. Lynn, I believe you'd like to talk on that for us, please. Just guide us through it. You've all got it, your document there in front of you anyway.
Yeah, it's just been set out as a table, Chair. So there's a few items that have been put against dates, if members are happy with those. The next meeting is on the 8th of March, so we've penciled in finance and performance monitoring Q3 and also the annual overview of crime and disorder. Then on the 19th of April, we've put in the annual discussion with the leader and executive director on performance and future strategies. So the committee have asked whether or not they're happy with those dates. The rest of the paper really is just keeping committee informed on the situation regarding briefing notes and reports that they've been awaiting, the situation regarding task groups, which we've already covered tonight. Members will probably have read in the table that the previously agreed item on digital inclusion has been postponed until later in the year. This is largely due to, following the impact of COVID-19, the actual digital strategy has been delayed, and that's had a knock-on effect with the work that we were hoping Scrutiny would do. So that would be carried over till later on. We've talked tonight about managing arrears. The area of housing rent has been separated out, and that'll be again a later piece of work. So members are really just asked to agree those forward items for the committee timetable.
Right. Councillor Jerry Roodhouse.
I didn't know whether Ian had his hand up before me.
All right. Well, I was looking at my papers. I missed that.
Apologies, it's a vestigial hand.
I know that feeling. I was just looking at the leader and executive, 19th of April, and crime and disorder. I thought we always spoke with the leader and executive slightly earlier than 19th of April. I'm not saying, you know, if elections are on, people might be into PERDA by then.
I haven't got an opinion on that. Councillor Ian Pickett, did you say you wanted, your hand's gone down? Did you still want to speak?
No, Chair. It was up by error.
Right. So the leader and executive, would you like to bring 19th of April? Did you want to bring that one forward, Jerry?
I mean, yeah, that's what I was suggesting. I see Chris has got his hand up, but
yeah,
I
was thinking it on
one
question.
I don't see Aftab's got his hand up now as well. But
I'll let Aftab respond to that. Then I'm going to go to Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, we would be within PERDA, and to avoid any issues around that PERDA period, then I think it's a sensible suggestion by Councillor Roodhouse to bring that forward to the next meeting, which would be outside of PERDA.
So we're bringing it back to 8th of March. It's going to be a pretty busy meeting, that one, because we haven't got one unless, no, that's it. So the last one of the financial year is the 19th of April. Chris.
Well, probably slightly unnecessary now. I just wanted to support Jerry in his observation. I thought he was absolutely right.
Yeah, well, he is right. It's just the mechanics, you know, of getting it there, because the 8th of March, if you look at it, we've already got the financial performance and crime and disorder on that one. After, just for guidance, would crime and disorder, would that be, could we have that on the 19th of April?
Yes, we could, but it's difficult for me to provide you with a judgment, given that without knowing the details around what is going to be discussed, because as we know, in terms of PERDA, it's effectively every issue on its own merits in terms of determining whether it can be discussed within PERDA or not.
Well, basically, with the crime and disorder, it's from what I'm reading, and it wasn't on my committee last time, so I think it's just a report to us. It's not something we have to make a decision on. I think they just report to us, but Lynn can clarify that for me. Then I'm going to come back to Ian and Dan.
It might be better if Dan speaks before me. I was only going to say that if you did want to invite the Police and Crime Commissioner, then obviously you wouldn't be able to do that either for the same reasons as the other item on Leader and Executive Director, that you'll be in PERDA, and obviously those elections would be taking place. Yeah.
Well, the Crime Commissioner can possibly wait, but there's a statutory requirement to have that crime and disorder report.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Dan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Charles, I was going to make the similar point to Lynn, actually, in that in previous years we have had the Police and Crime Commissioner there, but that's not essential. I think the job is to receive an annual report of the Community Safety Partnership, and I can certainly do that by way of an update report and keep it relatively neutral if the need arises.
All right. So, Councillor Ian Picker and Chris Cade, please.
Yes, I think this is one of those cases of great minds think alike, because I was actually also going to make the point about the Police and Crime Commissioner, but I think a report in April followed by perhaps inviting the Police and Crime Commissioner, whoever it is, at a later date might be a good way to proceed.
Yeah, that's the way I'm thinking. Chris?
I was just a little concerned that this is our one and only opportunity ever to review police and crime, which is a statutory responsibility. That report is the only time we get to review anything. And so I'm a bit concerned that we would take it just as a report and not take it as a report to be scrutinised.
I think you misunderstood my words. What we're trying to do is keep the politics out of it by not having the Police and Crime Commissioner there. We will scrutinise it. I'm not saying we're not going to do it, but I'm trying to keep the politics out of it so that we don't fall foul of PERDA. Otherwise, we're going to have everybody on the 8th of March, and we're going to be there till gone 10 o'clock. Dan, can you confirm that if we move Police and Crime Commissioner to the 19th of April, it will be done in a way that we're not going to fall foul of PERDA?
I don't see any reason why we can't do that, but I'd need to take advice from AFTAB on the content of the report just to make sure that doesn't happen.
AFTAB.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps it's one where myself and Dan can have a conversation outside of this meeting, and then we can report back to you, Chair, on that particular item.
I mean, otherwise we're going to have to try and squeeze in another committee meeting, and I know that's going to be just as problematical as what we're discussing at the moment. But we've only got those 2 meetings, and as we're having the leader and the executive in March, along with the finance and performance monitoring, that's going to be a very busy meeting without adding the crime and disorder on top of it. Yeah, after.
That's just residual hand, Chair.
Right. So preliminary, are we in agreement that we will move crime and disorder to the 19th of April and the leader and the executive to the 8th of March meeting along with finance and performance monitoring? If you're in agreement, can you please show, please? Yep, okay, your team's in agreement. So if we can do that, Lynn, please. Right, and the last item, again, we've got the table attached, the progress of motions. Again, Lynn, would you mind talking us through that one, please?
Thank you, Chair. As requested at a previous meeting, you asked for the progress of previous notice of motion that have been taken to council. So this is just a table outlining all the ones that have happened so far this municipal year. You've got the copy of the actual motion wording, the timescales, and there is the information on the progress as to the current situation for each one.
Right. Councillor Ian Picker.
Sorry, hand was still up.
Has anybody got any questions or remarks to make on that? I think it speaks for itself. Nope. Right, well, that's the last item on the agenda. Marie, can you let me know when the live streaming's ended, please?